But I asked the big question, how are you feeling today? How are you feeling today? And so when I ask youth that, when I ask communities that, when I ask parents that, then we really get down to the threshold of what is the need today. Whatever that need is, that's the basic need for healing. And so in the work that I do, art is at the pinnacle of it, of course. Part of my art is poetry and writing and storytelling. But I also teach practitioners, and I also teach leaders in the community how to bring in some of these really important paradigms into the work they do. And this is not new. This is culturally how we've been healing since we've been born into this world. Our DNA speaks poetry. Our DNA is stories. If we look at the neurons in our brain, if we talk about how do we make a shift, we can't make a shift until we make a brain health shift. And when we talk about neuroscience, the neuroscience of storytelling, the neuroscience of writing, is the human condition of storytelling. When I tell my story and you hear my story, now my cells hook up with your cells, and now we are together in a human form where we connect even better. You tell me your story, I hear your story, now my cells hook up with your cells, and now our brains are beginning to retrain themselves so that we can formulate a human condition for listening and for healing. So that's all we do. We can continue to do all these other things, but until we sit in a circle, have a relationship, and tell stories, and be with one another, then we're not going to see the real healing. We're not going to know who's hungry. We're not going to know who needs a new pair of shoes. We're not going to know who didn't get their coffee this morning. I know who did, because I spoke with that person this morning, because I'm in a relationship with them, and I'm like, baby girl, we're going to get you some coffee. You know? This is what I'm thinking. So, all that said, you got to know me, Uche. I'm sorry if I go off. You just take it off. You got to stop. Go ahead. Come over and touch me on my shoulder. Because I don't have a PhD. I just got a master's degree. So sometimes I get a little bit community, a little country.
I'm over here laughing and not in his face. All right. So I think it's important what you said. One of my favorite quotes is, Arthur Lloyd, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, right? So if these things were created by masters or society that meant to destroy, kill, and tear apart communities of color, then we can't expect those same tools to be the things that rebuild our communities, right? So we have to look in other ways. We have to look historically what we used to do within ourselves to try to figure out how we fix these issues. So thank you for that. So speaking of these communities being torn apart, Nadia, I really wanted to ask you, I'm gonna call you Nadia too, okay? Yeah, that's all right. So I mentioned something earlier. Your work is focused on Black women and girls. Can you tell me about that and why, and how that is also a shift?
Okay, thank you. How you doing, man? Okay, so before I even go into that, can I just ask us all to take a deep breath, right? And let's just really even just think for a moment about the great comments that have already been shared, right? These have been some great, beautiful, powerful, shifting movement comments that have already been shared, right? And let's take a moment to think about the kind of community that has already been established in this room, right? By us showing up and being authentically ourselves. My girl tripped a little bit on me and talked a little bit, because I was the coffee comment. I was like, boy, girl, I ain't have no coffee, I ain't gonna make it. Like, she was just like loving on me, like, I need some coffee, right? So, and let's just uplift and let me break down a comment you just made when you was like, I ain't no PhD, child. You a whole PhD in life, right? And regardless of all the degrees that anyone can possibly have, when you are an expert in your life, you are a doctor in your life. And one of the things that was said earlier is, we have to be a part of our own solutions. One of the things I often say is not for us without us. Don't try to build a solution and build a program without coming to me and asking me what I need, without coming to me and getting a sense of what my lived experiences are, because it's not going to work, it's going to fail, it's ultimately going to replicate our master's tools, right? And our master's tools do not service. I'm gonna come back to that too, and what you were saying too, because it's all history, right? And so we have, and this is why we operate, and that's what I mean when I'm talking about the term disruptive justice, right? Social justice really focuses on equality. We don't need equality, right? Because if everyone has the same, it's not going to, it disrupts the inequities that are built in the system that keep some people at a disadvantage, right? So now, I'm gonna come back to what you just asked me about. So you asked me about our focus on Black women and girls, right? So My research specifically had to do with the lived experiences of Black women and girls with mental health concerns. And one of the things I found in speaking to a lot of women, and one of the things I found in my own lived experiences of the Black women living with bipolar 2, high functioning, rapid cycling, is that our systems of health and wellness are not built to be a true reflection of the things that we need. And this goes back to our master's tool, right? The founding father of psychiatry, Benjamin Rush, who was on the American Psychiatric Association logo up until 2015, created the field of psychiatry and basically said, Black people are not real. We're not real, right? He mentored a psychiatrist who operated in Alabama for a short while, who came up with the psychosis that said if a slave ran away from their master, they must be criminally insane, right? That's not for us. That's those kind of ideas and medical models are meant to keep us in a particular place, right? They don't acknowledge why we run it. Because of trauma, because you beat me, because you ripped me away from my family. This is a natural human response to inequity. What you're telling me is I am crazy for fighting for my freedom. But guess what? That sentiment still exists in the mental health field, which is why counselors, psychiatrists, and psychologists can still graduate from a program and still get no curriculum on Black mental health. Can still get no curriculum on culturally responsive mental health care. Can get no curriculum on social determinants of health, which is a lot of what you were speaking about, which is really housed in public health, but should be more greatly embedded in medical curriculum. This is why we focus on Black women and girls, because the research that I know about and the lived experiences I know about is it took a long time for me to find a counselor and a psychiatrist who could support me effectively and see me authentically, right? And I know that that is what keeps a lot of Black and brown individuals from accessing mental health services. And we can't navigate the same trauma that we're talking about here if we can't tap into resources that are going to support us effectively. I also know that Black women experience racism, sexism, there's an intersectional aspect to our experiences. And I know that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be of support to everyone else. And that's where our name martyrs come from. We're constantly martyring ourselves for our communities to support our communities. However, a big part of community, and this is something that, to piggyback on something that you just said, we're individuals, right? And as individuals, we are responsible for our own healings. I am responsible for my healing. You are responsible for your healing as a community, right? As an individual. But if I'm on the path and on the journey of prioritizing myself and taking responsibility for my healing, and I happen to have somebody in my circle who is not that far along in their journey, I can pull them in. Absolutely. And we can support each other. And we can love each other. So if I'm down here on my journey and you're up here, I can pull back and say, let me tell you how I got this healing. Let me tell you how I worked through this trauma. Let me tell you how I got the things that I needed. And that's a big part of what we do with our organization, because as Black women, we have to prioritize ourselves and say, you know what, I can be of service to my community, but I have to be of service to myself. And even though you're seeing a panel right now of all Black women, let me let you know that a healed Black woman can remind a Black man that the world has lied to him in regards to what his place is. We know that research has said, some of this research was published, like the Secretary of State who did the Moynihan report back in the day, who said, oh my gosh, Black men are not in the home, they're not being fathers, they're not doing this, that, and the other. Research that came out in 2021 said that's a lie. Black dads are present, Black dads are active, Black dads are engaged, Black dads are supporting their families. They are here, but that's years of communicating that false message that a lot of our brothers have internalized. So Black women, healed Black women, can be the ones to remind our Black men that no, you are important, you're valuable, we love you, we see you and support you, but we also need you to take responsibility for your healing as well.
Okay, all right. And I really love what you said. I really want to give it up to, you know, uplifting Black men. Can we do that? Can we uplift our Black men? We know that there are societal issues that are pushing them down, so we're really thankful that you mentioned that. So I want to go a little deep, and I think I want all of you to touch on this if possible. So we're here about public safety, right? We're uplifting public safety and trying to really identify what that means. It's easy to be like, oh, public safety means, you know, first responders, right? But when we're thinking about shifting the concept and the conversation around public safety, and even creating peace in our environments. What social determinants come to mind? Maybe you touched on them. What comes to mind that adversely affect our communities? And how do we create change?
Yeah, when we talk, just to take a step back, when we're talking about the social determinants of health, we're talking about what are all the things in our lives that impact our health. And so I'm sure we could all name those. We talked, one, about housing, I mentioned previously. We talked about mental health, right? We talked about access to storytelling in our communities. Education is a social determinant of health. Also, racism is a social determinant of health. And so sometimes we might hear that race is a determinant of health, but it's actually racism. So the oppression or disinvestment based on race is what helps to determine folks' health impact, right? Because we have used race in this country, society, world to dictate where people live, what type of access they have to education, what type of access they have to health care. And ultimately, the restriction of those things that you need to be healthy is a disinvestment, but it's also trauma, right? So when we are not able to get access to the things that we need to be healthy, that creates trauma in our lives. And a little bit to Nadia's point, right, we start to internalize our expectation of what we deserve. And so there is a physical manifestation of what that looks like in our neighborhoods and our communities, but there's also a mental, an emotional, and spiritual impact to how we understand that and what our expectations are around what we think and believe we deserve to have. And so I think it's really important as we're thinking about how we make change and shift in our physical environment. We're also thinking about how we make shift and change in our emotional and spiritual well-being and environment. And I think that really taps into a lot of what the other ladies are saying here in how do we build relationship with one another? How do we do the work within ourselves to understand what we need and what we deserve? And then how do we meet our representatives, like city representatives, like our nonprofit organizations, which are also supposed to have a mission to do things that serve community. How do we meet those other folks in our community who are standing in the gap to be stewards of the things that we need with the expectations that we have? And I think that's how and where we really start to make change is recognizing our individual and collective power and being able to build on that. Because I got people calling me every day about, hey, this is what I know I want. This is what I know I'm supposed to have. And sometimes those conversations are hard, but those are the folks who are getting what they need because they're like, I know this ain't right. I know this is not the way that this is supposed to be. And because many of our institutions are reflections of this history, right? And these master's tools, it takes us being able to push back against what we understand and what's already present that might be perpetuating these master's tools to really start to break down and undesign what is existing and start to create new programs, new policies, and new ways of being. And I think it really does start with the individual, with the collective, and then with our institutions. So I think I answered the question a little bit.
Love that, yeah. So, sis said take responsibility, know what you are, what you deserve. I mean, these are things that we are, as a community, having to learn both in our homes and in institutions. So that's new. Like you said, Nadia, these are things that have been put in place. And y'all, we can have answers, but understand systems and institutionalized racism didn't just happen yesterday, okay? So we can't have the expectation they're going to get fixed yesterday. But if you know better, you would do better. Okay. All right. Nadia, same question. So again, we're talking about public safety. Creating creating peaceful environments. I always like to say increasing peace instead of stopping violence. Let's focus on the positive parts, right? We have peace, how do we increase it? So what social determinants to you come to mind that are adversely affecting our communities, and what do we change about that?
Okay, so I think the two social determinants of health that pop out to me are housing and education. It's probably because that's just how my mind is here. But before I even go into why those two things are important, I do want to highlight the fact that violence, specifically gun violence, has already been identified by the American Association for Public Health as a public health issue, right? So because it's a public health issue, it should be and is being currently addressed in the same ways that cancer is being addressed, in the same way that mental health is being addressed, and it should be, because really it's the environments that are giving rise to some of these concerns. And that goes back to kind of what some of the things that were mentioned earlier in regards to history. Education and where you live are immensely important to that. However, the solutions that we need are individual, right? And then institutional. And I believe that's already been said as well. Individual because, well, let me say this. Institutional because the structural and systemic racism that's embedded in our education system and our housing system, it's not our fault. At the end of the day, it's not our fault, right? And I can't be any more transparent than to say that I lived in one community for years, love that community. But when I moved one exit up, research-wise, I added to the trajectory of my daughter's lifespan. I added to the trajectory of her economic viability. I added to the likeliness that she will graduate from high school. I added to the likeliness that she'll go on to college. I'll add to the likeliness of her being a homeowner. One exit up, right? Whose fault is that? And I made that move begrudgingly. I had a whole attitude, right? And then when I made that move, I experienced racism as I had never experienced before in my life because I moved away from my community. Which leads us to what? This concept of like survivor's remorse, right? You have this guilt. I left my home. I wanted to stay there, but that home is not set up for me to be successful. It's not set up for me to be accessible. It's not designed for me to be successful because it's impacted by all the things you were talking about, eminent domain, redlining, all of these things that give rise to low-performing schools, that don't pay their teachers, that don't provide us with equipment. It is a system that is making us sick. Now, how does that add to violence? Does that mean that individuals who are without are automatically going to be violent? Heck no. Let me tell you something. There's all sorts of crime and violence happening in the community I worked in, but it's not making the news. So there's stuff going on, right? There's stuff going on. So it's not that. But however, and this is around the world, because my family is Jamaica, Cuba, Guyana, India, Africa, right? It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. If you are living in a place of poverty, it gives rise to the psychological mentality that I have nothing to lose. So yeah, I'll go rob this store. Yeah, I'm going to try to resolve my conflicts with the gun. Yeah, I'm going to do this, that, and the other, because I have nothing to lose. And that's the difference between a 15-year-old in one community who says, oh, I'm going to go to college because I see that as a possibility, and a 15-year-old in another community that's like, I'm probably not going to live past 18. And I've had multiple conversations like that with young people. Like, what am I working towards? I got nothing to lose, right? So a big part of identifying and really working to find solutions to violence is to acknowledge that it's a set of, how many of y'all like Tupac? Like, come on now. Like, don't just be bobbing your head now. Like you've been talking about this for a long time, right? Like, he already said it was a setup from jump. Like, we already know. Like, if you're not going to read the history books, at least turn, I was about to say cassette on. Yeah. But at least blank download. Yeah. Some music and really listen to the lyrics, right? We've been talking about this for a long time. But now, that's the institutional aspect of it. The personal, behavioral aspect of it is we don't have to buy into it with our actions. We are responsible for who we are as individuals, right? I can be in an impoverished community, a low-performing school, and still perform, and still outperform, and still do my best, and still show up each and every day, and still hold my school accountable. I was talking earlier about speaking to a group of students who were not in a great school, But you know what? I talked to them long enough, they developed their own solutions, right? And that's another aspect of the change that's needed. I see a lot of young people here on a Saturday morning. I know that's rough. I know it's hard. It's hard for your parents too. That's why I keep asking for coffee. But you have, right? She's like, you still ain't got it. You have the solutions. You have the ability, and no one should be trying to make the solutions without talking to you first. No one should be trying to do an after-school program or an in-school program without talking to you first. And
Absolutely.
I will say, parents,
Fact.
listen to your young people, because if you do, then what you'll find out is there's some inequitable stuff going on in their schools. That prison pipeline thing is for real, right? There are people that criminalize and demonize your child. I had a teacher call. I'm about to tell my baby. I had a teacher call me in once for my daughter throwing a paper airplane. I was like, ma'am.
That is what kids do, right?
Did you really call me for a paper airplane? You don't know how to discipline a paper. I thought she threw a desk across the room. Like, you know. And then when I talked to my child, she climbed, talked about another child who was doing above and beyond in regards to behavior, but was never held accountable for that.
Yeah.
Right? We know what that is, right? Where a young child can, now she did get into the paper airplane, don't make fun of, like, she got called to the carpet. But, whereas another child was cussing a teacher out, was doing some other things, they weren't put in the trajectory of being a problem child. That child needs to be nurtured in a different way. That child needs to be a different attention, needs some different kind of attention. What I'm saying is,